Welcome back to our podcast, everyone. Today we have a fascinating story about a hero who not only rescued a princess, but now faces an unexpected twist. The queen demands he stay. Sounds intriguing, right?
Absolutely. It's a tale that dives deep into the complexities of duty, choice, and the unexpected weight of responsibility. So, let's set the scene. We have our protagonist, Cole, who has just finished a labyrinth of bureaucratic paperwork that spans two different species' legal systems.
Right. And can you believe it? A 14-page contract gets whittled down to just 2. That's quite the feat, especially when it comes to legal documents.
For sure, it really highlights his determination and the importance of clarity in agreements. What do you think about that clause stating he can leave with 30 days' notice? It's pivotal, don't you think?
Definitely. It shows that Cole values his freedom and autonomy. It's not just about the title of Bound Protector. It's about entering into a voluntary agreement, something that's crucial for him.
Exactly. And when he finally arrives at the signing ceremony, it's so telling that he chooses a smaller, more intimate setting. It seems to reflect his desire for a personal connection, rather than a grand spectacle.
And, speaking of connections, there's that poignant moment between Cole and Vayli. She asks him why he really agreed to take on this role. What do you think drives his decision?
Cole's reflection is quite revealing. He talks about searching for something worth the cost in the last few years of his life. It's a deep moment that resonates with anyone who's ever felt the weight of making a significant life choice.
Absolutely. And his realization that every past Bound Protector has died in service really puts the gravity of the situation into perspective. It's a heavy burden.
It is. And despite that, he still expresses a willingness to find out what this role truly means. That courage to embrace the unknown is compelling.
And after signing, the atmosphere shifts. No applause, but you can feel the weight of the decision settling in. It's almost like a breath of fresh air after a storm.
Perfectly said. And then we see Cole retreating to the Eastern Garden, a place for contemplation. What do you think he's reflecting on?
I think he's grappling with the reality of his new life, and the expectations that come with it. Vayli's warnings about how people will treat him differently add to that complexity.
Exactly. It's a mix of excitement and apprehension, and I love how they share a space without always needing to talk. That silent companionship adds depth to their relationship.
It really does. And when Vayli assures Cole that the Queen made the decision on her own, it breaks any potential tension. It emphasizes trust.
Trust is vital, especially in a position like his. As Cole prepares for the future, he's not just stepping into a role. He's embracing a new chapter in his life.
And he's doing so with caution and optimism, which is a great approach to any new venture. It mirrors our own journeys, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And as he contemplates the challenges ahead, it's a reminder that every decision shapes our path. Just like Cole's choices will shape his future.
So, to wrap up, Cole's journey is not just about protecting a queen. It's about finding purpose and meaning in decisions that could change everything.
Well said. Thank you all for tuning in today. We hope you enjoyed this exploration of duty, choice, and the complexities of life. Until next time.
He rescued the princess. Now the queen demands he stay. Cole Harrington had not planned on being anyone's hero that day. He had not planned on much of anything, really, except finding something worth selling inside a dead ship floating at the edge of the Veth corridor. The corridor was a long, dark stretch of space that sat between the edge of human territory and the beginning of the Orange sovereignty. Nobody with any real sense spent time out there. Cole had been spending time out there for about 3 years. His ship, the Laredo, was not much to look at. It was a mid-range salvage hauler with a dent on the port side that he kept meaning to fix, a coffee maker that worked only when it felt like it, and a navigation system that sometimes switched languages mid-route for reasons he had never fully figured out. He had bought it with his separation pay after leaving the Marine Corps, and in a life that had not offered him many stable things, the Laredo was one of them. The derelict he had found that morning was a Tarvet-class freighter, Orin-built, probably 8 or 9 years old. It was drifting without power, no distress signal, no identification beacon active. That was either very good news or very bad news for a salvager. Cole had learned over the years that it was usually both at the same time. He docked at the secondary port on the freighter's lower hull and suited up. His gear was practical: a sealed worksuit, a handheld scanner, a cutting tool, and a sidearm he had not fired in 14 months. He moved through the ship quietly, the way the Corps had trained him to move through unfamiliar spaces. Slow, deliberate, eyes forward, ears open. Panels were pulled off the walls, wiring hung loose in the corridors, and 2 of the cargo lifts had been manually jammed open. Cole noted all of this and kept walking. He was not here for the upper decks anyway. His scanner had picked up a faint reading 2 levels down, near what the ship's layout suggested was the main cargo hold. It was a biological reading, faint, but alive. He found the source behind a locked interior door at the back of the hold. The lock was a basic commercial model, nothing heavy. He cut through it in about 40 seconds and pushed the door open. The room was small and cold, and smelled like rust and stale recycled air. There were 3 cage units bolted to the far wall. 2 were empty. 1 was not. She was young. That was the first thing Cole noticed. The second thing he noticed was that she was Orin. He had seen Orin before, mostly at trading stations and border posts. They were tall and lean, with pale grayish skin and large dark eyes that caught light in a way that made most humans a little uncomfortable at first. This one was curled on the floor of the cage, wearing the torn remains of something that had once been a formal garment, with intricate markings along the collar and sleeves. Her wrists were bound with a restraint cable, and there were cuts on her arms that had scabbed over, but not properly healed. Cole stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at all of it. Then he walked over and crouched down in front of the cage. She looked up at him. Her eyes were sharp, even through the exhaustion and the fear. He told her calmly that he was going to get her out. He asked if she could walk. She stared at him. She said in careful and slightly formal English that she could walk. She asked who he was. He told her his name and said he was a salvager working the corridor. He started working on the cage lock with his cutting tool. He told her not to read too much into this. He just did not like finding people in cages. She watched him work without saying anything else. The restraint cable on her wrists took a few minutes longer to deal with, because it was a higher grade model than the cage lock, the kind used to hold cargo rather than restrain a person. Cole worked through it carefully. When it finally came loose, she pulled her arms forward slowly, and he could see her wince at the movement. He opened his kit and wrapped her wrists with the medical tape he kept on hand for his own cuts and scrapes. It was human medical tape, not made for Orin's skin, but it held and it was clean. He helped her to her feet. She was steadier than he expected. She kept one hand on the cage wall for a moment. She was taller than him by several inches. Most Orin were. He asked her how long she had been there. She said 9 days. He did not say anything to that. He just picked up his scanner, checked the corridor reading, and started moving toward the door. What happened next did not go the way Cole had planned, mostly because Cole had not fully planned it. He had assumed the ship was abandoned. That was a mistake. As they came up through the cargo lift to the second level, 2 men appeared at the far end of the corridor. They were human, which surprised him. He had expected Orin crew, not humans. They were armed, and they reacted fast when they saw Cole and the girl. Cole reacted faster. He pulled the Orin girl into a side maintenance corridor and put his back to the wall. He did a quick count. 2 visible ahead, likely more on the upper deck, where the command systems would be. The fastest route back was through the main corridor, which was no longer a safe option. He thought for about 4 seconds. Then he told the girl to stay close and keep hold of his jacket and not let go for any reason. They moved through the back of the ship using a maintenance passage Cole had spotted on his way in, a habit from the Corps. Always clock the alternate routes first. The passage was tight and low, and Cole had to duck the whole way through. The girl moved quietly despite 9 days in a cage and whatever else had been done to her. They reached the lower docking port. Behind them, voices were spreading through the ship, getting louder and more organized. Cole got the Laredo's hatch open and moved the girl through first, then stepped in and sealed it. He went straight to the cockpit. He hit the release command on the docking clamp, and the clamp jammed. Because of course it did, because that was the kind of day it was. He vented a short burst from the port exhaust through the docking collar. It was not a recommended procedure. It was not something the manufacturer suggested under any circumstances. It burned through the clamp in under 2 seconds, put a new scorch mark on the lower hull, and separated the Laredo from the freighter with a hard shudder that Cole barely noticed. He punched the ship forward into the debris field that ran along the corridor's edge, threading through the rocks on manual control, not giving the navigation system a chance to panic. A small armed runner came after them. It had been sitting dark on the far side of the freighter, which Cole filed away as something to think about later. It followed them into the outer edge of the debris field, and stayed there for about 6 minutes before deciding the rocks were not worth the damage and turning back. Cole kept going for another 20 minutes at full speed before he finally slowed down. She was sitting in the co-pilot's seat, very still, watching him. Her dark eyes moved over the cockpit, and then back to his face with a kind of careful assessment that suggested she was smarter and more composed than 9 days in a cage had any right to leave someone. He went to the galley without saying anything. He came back with 2 pouches of instant chicken and rice soup, the kind that tasted mostly like salt and warm water, and held one out to her. She looked at the pouch for a moment. Then she took it, opened it the way he had opened his, and started eating. Cole sat in the pilot's seat, ate his soup, and started thinking about what he was going to say when they reached the Orin patrol beacon. He would need to explain who he was, what he had found, and why he had a young Orin female on board his salvage ship. He would also need to explain the scorch marks on the hull, but that was a problem for later. Outside the viewport, the stars were quiet. The Laredo hummed along at a steady pace, heading for the beacon signal on the edge of the Sovereignty's border, and the girl in the co-pilot's seat ate her soup and did not stop watching him. He did not mind being watched. He had nothing to hide. He just hoped whoever was at the beacon had a good sense of context. He rescued the princess. Now the queen demands he stay. The Orin patrol ship found the Laredo before the Laredo found the beacon. It dropped out of faster-than-light travel about 2 kilometers off the bow, and for a brief moment, Cole thought he had made a significant navigational error. The patrol vessel was large, a military-class ship, angular and dark, with weapons arrays that were already tracking the Laredo before Cole had finished reading the contact alert on his console. He kept his hands visible on the controls and did not touch anything he did not have to. A hail came through within seconds. Cole answered it. The officer on screen spoke in Orin first, then switched to English when Cole's pilot registration came up on their system. The officer asked him to identify the passenger on board. Cole glanced over at the girl. He said her name was Vayli, and that he had found her on a derelict freighter in the corridor. He said she was alive, not seriously injured, and that she had been held in a cargo cage for approximately 9 days. He told the officer there had been an armed group running the ship, and that they would want to send someone back to that location before it drifted further. The officer went very still when he heard the name. Then he left the screen without another word. The response that followed suggested to Cole that he had found the right Vayli. Within 2 minutes, 3 additional Orin vessels dropped into visible range. The Laredo was brought into the patrol ship's docking bay by remote guidance. No one asked if that was acceptable. Cole sat back and let it happen. Fighting a remote tow with 6 military ships watching was not something he intended to spend energy on. The bay was full of Oran soldiers before the docking ramp had finished extending. They moved in formal tactical gear, with the precision of people who had been briefed on exactly this situation, and had been hoping it would never actually happen. Vayli walked off the ship first, and the soldiers shifted immediately into a protection formation around her. A medical team was already waiting at the edge of the bay. They guided her away quickly and efficiently, and within 90 seconds of her leaving the ship, she had disappeared behind a sealed corridor door. That left Cole standing at the base of his ramp, with his hands loose at his sides, watching an empty bay full of soldiers who were not entirely sure what to do with him. A senior officer approached. She was tall, formal in bearing, with the kind of posture that came from spending a long time around people who paid close attention to posture. She told Cole, in precise English, that he was to be transported to Veth Sora, the Oran homeworld, under the protection of the sovereignty. Cole asked if that was a request. She looked at him for a moment. She said it was not. He went back onto the Laredo, sent a remote instruction to the automated feeder at the docking station on Praxis 4 to cover the cat's meals for an extended period, grabbed a change of clothes and his kit bag, locked the ship up, and walked back down the ramp. He told the officer he was ready whenever she was. She studied him for a moment, the way people sometimes studied things they didn't have a category for yet. Then she turned and walked, and he followed. The journey to Veth Sora took 2 days on the patrol ship. Cole was given a guest cabin that was clean, reasonably sized, and had a lock that worked from the outside. He noted the lock and decided not to make an issue of it. He had slept in worse conditions more times than he could count. He saw Vayli once, briefly, in a corridor on the second day. She had been cleaned up and changed into fresh clothes, and looked considerably steadier than when he had found her. She stopped when she saw him. He nodded. She said his name quietly, like she was testing how it fit in her mouth. He told her he was glad she was recovering. Then her escort moved her along, and that was that. Veth Sora was not what Cole had expected, though he had not expected much specifically, which was usually the wisest position to take when approaching something new. The planet was old, not in a worn-down way, but in the way that centuries of deliberate construction gave a place a sense of weight and intention. The capital rose from a wide plateau in long terrace levels, and the buildings were made from a pale crystalline material that scattered the light and made the whole city look faintly luminous from the inside, like it was generating its own soft glow. Cole watched the approach through the transport window and said nothing, and missed the architecture tour he was apparently not going to get. He was settled in the palace's eastern guest wing, a set of rooms with high ceilings and furniture built for someone considerably taller than him. An attendant brought food that was good, even if unfamiliar, and told him the queen would receive him in the morning. Cole thanked the attendant and asked, genuinely curious, whether the lattice pattern in the crystal ceiling was structural or purely decorative. The attendant blinked at him several times and left. The throne hall the next morning was the largest indoor space Cole had been in that was not a military facility or a cargo terminal. The walls rose to a vaulted ceiling that was too high to make out the details of from the floor. The crystalline construction was everywhere. Walls, columns, sections of the floor, catching the morning light from high, narrow windows and breaking it into slow drifting patterns across the room. There were perhaps 50 people arranged along the sides in positions that clearly meant something specific in terms of rank and function. The whole room was completely silent. Cole walked in the way he always walked into unfamiliar places, comfortable in his own pace, taking in the details around him without performing anything. He was in clean clothes, nothing formal. He had considered finding something more appropriate, and decided that the wrong kind of formal was worse than honest. Queen Sovara sat at the far end of the hall on a raised platform. She was older than he had imagined. Not frail, not soft, but settled in the particular way of someone who had been the most powerful person in every room they entered for a very long time. Her eyes found Cole the moment he walked in, and stayed on him all the way up the length of the hall. He stopped at what felt like the appropriate distance. He had not been told the correct greeting protocol, so he gave a single deliberate nod. Respectful, clear, not a performance. Someone behind him made a quiet alarm sound. Vayli was standing to the left of the throne, in formal court dress, with her hands folded. She looked at Cole with the expression of a person watching something roll slowly toward the edge of a table. He gave her the smallest possible shrug, which he hoped communicated that he was doing his genuine best. The Queen spoke through a translation device that rendered her words in English a half-second after she said them, giving every sentence a faint echo. She thanked him for returning her daughter. She said the sovereignty recognized his actions, and that the people of the Orin held such things in the highest regard. Cole said he appreciated that, and that he was genuinely glad Vayli was safe. The Queen asked him how he had known the princess was worth the risk. He said he had not known she was a princess. He said she had been a person in a cage, and that had been enough of a reason. The room went very quiet after that. Not the polite quiet of before, something deeper. A silence that spread from person to person as the words settled. The Queen looked at him for a long time with an expression that was completely unreadable. Then she said there were important matters to discuss, and that he would be informed of a formal audience the following afternoon. Cole said that was fine. On his way out, he paused near the door and asked one of the guards whether the crystalline wall panels were a naturally occurring mineral or a manufactured composite. The guard stared straight ahead and gave no answer. Cole nodded to himself and walked out into the corridor, thinking about the architecture and not yet about what the formal audience was going to contain. If he had known, he might have spent the evening differently. He rescued the princess. Now the Queen demands he stay. The formal audience was held the following afternoon, and most of the court was there for it. Cole stood in the throne hall with the same easy posture he had walked in with the previous morning. Unhurried, hands relaxed at his sides, comfortable in his own body in a way that seemed to genuinely bother the people around him. The hall had filled in considerably since yesterday. Advisors, senior military officers, representatives from the various houses of the sovereignty, and a collection of other figures whose roles Cole did not know, had all arranged themselves along the walls in a specific order that clearly carried meaning. He counted close to 70 people before he lost interest in counting and started studying the way the light moved through the upper windows instead. Vayli stood near the throne. She had been briefed, clearly. Her posture was formal and still, and she kept her eyes forward rather than toward Cole, which told him she already knew what was coming, and did not particularly want to watch it. General Vorn Koss was present for the first time. Cole had heard the name twice in passing from palace staff, and had filed it away. The general was large for an Orin, not unusually tall, but built with the kind of settled density that came from a lifetime in military service. His face carried several old scars, and the sort of permanent, composed expression that Cole recognized from officers who had seen enough to stop being surprised by most things. He stood at the far edge of the hall, near the other military figures, and he watched Cole with the specific attention of someone who had not yet decided what category to put him in. The hall shifted. Not obviously, not noisily, but every person in it adjusted their posture and focus in a way that was entirely automatic. The physical reflex of people who had been in this room many times before and knew exactly what it meant when she walked in. Cole stood where he was. Queen Sovara took her place on the raised platform. She spoke for several minutes in Orin, formally and at length, before the translator rendered the summary in English. Cole listened to all of it. What she said was this: Cole Harrington, human, independent contractor, and non-citizen of the sovereignty, was to be granted the title of Bound Protector to Princess Vailey, third daughter of the royal line. It was an old title, created roughly 4 centuries ago during a period of internal conflict, and it existed to place a single trusted individual in close permanent proximity to a member of the royal family for the purpose of personal protection. The title carried full diplomatic recognition within the sovereignty, unrestricted access to palace grounds, a formal monthly stipend, and permanent quarters in the eastern wing of the palace. The condition was that the holder of the title could not leave Vethsora without the Queen's express permission. The Queen finished speaking. The hall settled into the specific kind of waiting silence that followed a decree. 70 people looked at Cole. Cole said, simply and without particular emotion, that he could not accept. What followed was a very particular type of silence, the kind that fills a room when something has been said that does not fit into any category of things the room was prepared for. Several of the senior advisors exchanged looks that Cole did not need a translation to understand. At least 2 guards moved their hands toward their weapons before stopping themselves. One of the junior court officials made a short, involuntary sound. Vailey, very slowly, raised one hand and covered her eyes. The Queen's expression did not visibly change, but something shifted behind her eyes. A sharpening, a recalibration. She asked him to explain himself. Cole said it was not a matter of personal feeling toward anyone in the room. He said he had a working ship and an existing debt he was under contract to clear, neither of which he could address from a fixed position on Vethsora. He said he had an arrangement for a cat at Praxis 4 station that was holding together on a remote automated system, which was not a permanent solution. He said that rescuing someone did not create an ownership claim over them, and that the same logic ran in the other direction. He had not agreed to any arrangement prior to arriving here, and an arrangement he had not agreed to was not one he was going to accept. He said all of this in the same calm and direct tone he used when explaining why a salvage estimate needed to be adjusted. The advisors began whispering to each other in urgent, quiet tones. General Vorn Kaz said nothing, but something shifted slightly in the line of his jaw. Vailey had lowered her hand and was now watching Cole with an expression that was difficult to categorize. Not angry, not entirely surprised, something more complicated and more careful than either. The Queen said the title was not being offered as a request. She said there were ongoing and credible threats against her daughter's life. She said the abduction had not been a random criminal act. It had been a deliberate political operation by House Draven, a rival power within the sovereignty, aimed at removing Vaeli from the line of succession. She said the operation had been active for 6 years before Cole had unknowingly collapsed it, and that House Draven had not been removed, only interrupted. Cole said he understood the situation, and that he was genuinely sorry about it. He said it sounded like a serious problem. He asked whether the palace security office had yet identified the full network of individuals connected to the freighter operation, because that seemed like the most productive immediate step toward addressing the actual threat. Another silence, a longer one this time. General Vorn Kaz, standing at the far edge of the hall, made a sound that lasted about 1 second, and that he immediately redirected into a composed and professional expression. He said nothing. The Queen ended the formal audience. Cole was escorted back to his guest quarters by 4 guards who were noticeably less relaxed about the whole thing than the staff who had been managing him up until now. He sat on the edge of the tall bed and thought through the situation with the practical section of his mind. He was not under formal arrest. No direct threat had been made. He had his ship, technically, though it was in a palace docking bay. He was on an alien homeworld, in a palace, surrounded by an entire sovereign government that had both the authority and the motivation to make his departure extremely difficult if they chose to. He had just declined a royal decree in front of 70 witnesses. He thought about that for a while. Then he thought about what dinner was going to be because he had missed the mid-afternoon meal, and his ribs were reminding him of the fact. He was brought food. He ate it. Later, well after the palace had gone quiet, and the light through the high window had faded to the dim reflected glow of the city below, there was a knock at his door. He opened it. Vayli was there. She was alone, no attendants, no escort, and she was in plain clothes without any of the formal layers the court required. She looked younger this way, less arranged. She asked if she could come in. He stepped back from the door. She came in and sat in the large chair near the window, the way someone sits when they have something to say and are working out how to say it. He sat on the edge of the bed. Neither of them spoke immediately. She told him, after a moment, that no one had ever refused her mother in a formal audience before. She said the court was still trying to work out the legal and diplomatic framework for how to handle it, and that 2 of the senior advisors had retired to a private room and had not been heard from since. She said his name had been used in several tones over the course of the afternoon that she was not going to translate directly. Cole said he was sorry to cause that kind of trouble. She looked at him and said she did not think he was actually sorry. He thought about it honestly. He said he was sorry about the trouble it caused for her specifically. He said the rest of it was other people's problem to sort out. She asked him, without any of the court's formal framing, what it would actually take. Not what he wanted in a general sense, just what the specific thing was. He was quiet for a while. Outside the window, the twin moons of Veth Sora were coming up over the city, their light catching the crystalline buildings and scattering into pale, soft patterns across the rooftops. He said it would need to be a choice, not an order handed down from a throne, not a title assigned because someone in authority had decided he owed a debt he had never agreed to. If someone wanted him to do something, he said, they should ask him. Genuinely ask him, with the full understanding that he might say no, and he would give them an answer that was genuinely his. He said he did not think that was an unreasonable position. Vayli looked at him for a long time. Her large, dark eyes moved over his face with the careful attention he had noticed in her from the first moment she had looked up at him, from the floor of that cage. The look of someone who was processing what they were seeing rather than just reacting to it. She said she would think about what he had said. She stood and left. Cole lay back on the too-tall bed and stared at the ceiling and calculated how long the Laredo's fuel reserves would hold before they needed a refresh, if he was not back within the month. He rescued the princess. Now the queen demands he stay. The attempt came 12 days after the formal audience, on an evening when the palace was the most crowded and the most distracted it had been since Cole arrived. He had spent those 12 days the way he spent time in any unfamiliar place, moving around, asking questions, learning the shape of things. He walked the palace grounds in the mornings, because the architecture genuinely interested him, and because staying in motion helped him think. He ate in the main staff hall, rather than taking his meals alone in his room, which meant that by the end of the first week, he knew the names of most of the kitchen workers, the 2 maintenance staff who managed the East Wing, and the older groundskeeper who maintained the water features in the Eastern Garden. He sat in on 2 public court sessions, taking a seat in the observer gallery because no one had told him he could not. He also spent time with Vayli, though not in any arranged way. She would find him in the afternoons, in the garden, or in the small reading room off the main corridor, or occasionally in the kitchen, talking to the staff about the preparation process for whatever unfamiliar thing had shown up at breakfast. They talked the way people talk when they are both curious and not performing anything. She asked him about humans in the practical way of someone who had studied them in academic texts, and found the reality considerably different from the descriptions. He answered without making anything larger than it was. In those conversations, he also learned a great deal about House Draven. More than Veli probably realized she was telling him. The night of the attempt, there was a formal anniversary ceremony in the main hall, a commemoration of a treaty that had shaped the sovereignty's current borders. Cole had been included in the general invitation, but had decided that standing in the formal hall for 3 hours was not the best use of his presence. He had positioned himself instead in the upper gallery overlooking the hall, where he could see the room clearly without being in the center of it. He had his back to the wall and a good view of every entrance. He had been up there for about 2 hours when he noticed the door on the west service corridor open and close quickly, a small movement at the edge of his sightline. He noticed it, because that door had not opened once in the 2 hours since the ceremony started, and service doors during formal events followed patterns. Cole was already moving toward the stairs before he had finished processing the decision. He had no weapon. He had not been carrying one since arriving. The palace had its own security force, and walking into a diplomatic setting armed seemed like the wrong first impression. So he had left the sidearm on the Laredo. What he had was the folding salvage blade clipped to his belt, a general understanding of how buildings like this one were typically laid out, and 12 days of walking the corridors with a quiet amount of attention. He came down through the east service stair and entered the connecting maintenance passage that ran behind the west wall of the main hall. He moved in the dark, with one hand on the wall, and his mind running through the building geometry. He came around the corner of the secondary corridor and nearly walked into the first one. The man was Oren, in dark fitted clothing, moving fast and low. He had not expected anyone in this corridor. Cole had not expected this specific person, but he had expected the possibility of a person, which was the important difference. The fight was short, and without any elegance whatsoever. Cole got a bruised jaw for his trouble, but the other person went down and stayed down. He kept moving and started working out the count. By the time he had reached the gallery passage behind the south entrance to the hall, he had a rough picture of it. 6 individuals, split into 2 groups, working from a plan that had been designed around the palace security team's standard ceremony deployment. The plan was good. It had clearly been put together by someone with inside knowledge of the security patterns, and against the palace guard alone, it would very likely have worked. Cole was not part of the palace guard's standard deployment. He came at the south side team through the connecting gallery between the 2 main wings, entering from the maintenance door at the far end. There were 3 of them. He used the fire suppression canister bolted to the wall, a long, heavy steel cylinder, the kind of object that was very useful in a situation that had moved past the point of subtlety, as a blunt instrument for the first 2. He used the door frame and the element of surprise for the 3rd. He came out of that with 2 cracked ribs on his left side and a cut opening on his forearm. He decided to address both of these facts later, and kept moving. The second group had redirected when they heard that something had gone wrong on the south side. They were moving toward an alternate exit near the east stair when Cole found them. One made it past him in the confusion and ran rather than turn to fight, which told Cole something specific. That person was not a trained combatant, just a runner. That was useful information. He leaned against the wall of the east corridor afterward and took 3 careful breaths, which told him the rib situation was real and not imaginary. He had a cut on his forearm that was producing more blood than he wanted to deal with right now. He had, at one point, moved too quickly across a freshly polished section of the marble floor near the gallery and slipped, catching himself on one knee. He was going to be quietly annoyed about that for several days. He found the intercom panel on the east wall and called the guard station directly. He spoke in the clipped, specific way that got fast responses from security personnel, regardless of what planet you were on. Short sentences, clear facts, locations stated precisely. He confirmed that Vayli was secure before he said anything else. She was. The guard commander confirmed it. Then Cole started walking slowly back toward the main hall, carrying the unconscious weight of one of the operatives he was dragging by the collar to a more visible location for the security team to find. On the way back, he passed the records office beside the south corridor. The door was slightly ajar. The court scribe inside was sitting at his desk with the posture of someone who was pretending very hard to be absorbed in something routine. Cole slowed down and looked through the gap. The scribe's right sleeve, where it had pulled back slightly from his wrist, had a smear of dark compound along the inner edge. The same compound Cole had seen on the baseboards of the service corridor entry point. It was a boot sealing treatment used by tactical teams operating in low-light environments to reduce noise from footwear. It was not something a court scribe doing routine record work at night would typically have on his sleeve. Cole continued to the nearest active guard post and told the officer exactly where to look, what compound to look for, and where the scribe's desk was relative to the south corridor. Then he went to the eastern garden and sat down on his bench. General Vorn Koss found him there 22 minutes later. The general walked across the garden without urgency and sat down on the bench across from Cole without asking. He looked at Cole's arm, the blood that had made it through the sleeve, the careful way Cole was breathing to keep the ribs from complaining too loudly. He looked at all of this and said nothing for a long time. Then he said, in English that was careful and precise, that he had been a military officer for 31 years. He said that in those years he had evaluated a very large number of individuals in a very large number of situations. Cole waited. The general said he would not make any official statement that evening. He said it would not be appropriate for him to do so. He said that Cole should simply know that in his personal assessment, the palace was safer at that moment than it had been when the sun came up that morning. Cole said he appreciated hearing that. The general stood and walked back toward the hall, without any further comment. Cole sat with his ribs and the moonlit garden for a while longer. The twin moons were high, and the city below the plateau was lit up in its quiet, crystalline way, and the garden was very still. Later, after the palace medic had closed the cut on his forearm with 4 small strips and wrapped his ribs tightly enough that he could breathe without actively wincing, there was a knock at his door. He opened it. Queen Savara stood in the corridor. She was alone. No attendants, no formal escort, no ceremonial anything. She was wearing a plain outer coat that still managed to look like something worn by someone important, because some people carry authority in their posture, regardless of what they are dressed in. She was not holding the translation device. She spoke in Orin for a short time. Then she switched to English. She said she did not understand humans. She said the species did not make sense to her in the ways that most things she encountered eventually made sense. She said she had reviewed the complete available record of his background and service history, and still could not arrive at a full explanation for how a person became the kind of person he appeared to be. Cole said honestly that he was not entirely sure he had a complete explanation for it either. She sat in the chair near the window, not with the posture of a queen making an appearance, with the posture of a woman who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had briefly put it down. She said she had come close to losing her daughter twice in the same month. She said that was a thing she did not have an adequate framework for. Some things did not need a response. After a while, she looked at him and asked, without any decree behind the words, without any formal weight, just as a person asking another person a direct question. She asked if he would consider staying. Cole looked at her for a long moment. He asked whether the palace stipend had provisions for covering maintenance on a privately owned vessel docked in the palace bay. She studied him. Then she said she believed that could be arranged. Cole nodded slowly and looked out the window at the moonlit city. He said he would think about it. She stood and left. Cole sat in the quiet room with his taped ribs and his closed-up arm, and the sounds of the palace settling for the night. He thought for a long time, not about the politics or the title or the ceremony, just about what he was doing with his life and what he wanted it to look like. He did not have a final answer that night, but the shape of one was beginning to come clear.